Hey everyone, this is Mike. Today we're going to be talking about the warrior changes that happened in patch 5.3. Since warrior is a job that I play quite a bit, I main tank for most of the content as well. So I thought I would talk about these first before I go into the astrologian changes, because I'm not really a healer mean by any stretch of imagination. So I'm going to be talking about warrior first today. So I'll be going over all of the different changes first, talk about what they are, then talk about how they kind of affect the rotation of warrior as well, because there are some changes happening in the rotation itself. And then I'll just kind of give my opinion on those changes as well as I talk about what they changed about warriors. So, first of all, Berserk now has an additional effect that it extends the duration of Storm's Eye by 15 seconds all the way up to a maximum of 60, meaning that your maximum cap of Storm's Eye is now 60 seconds rather than the previous 30 seconds. Mithril Tempest, this is your AoE combo, now extends the duration of Storm's Eye by 30 seconds, again to a maximum of 60. This is an increase by 20 seconds. Previously it would only extend it by 10 seconds. Now, very important to note here is that it only extends the duration of Storm's Eye. It does not grant you the buff. Storm's Eye itself basically does the same as it does before, it gives you just 30 seconds of the duration, but again, if you already have it, it will now extend it by 30 seconds as well, all the way up to, again, the cap of 60 seconds. In release, same thing as with Berserk, extends the duration by 15 seconds. Again, extends does not grant you the effect of Storm's Eye, so you can't just use it at the start of a fight to do like a second GCD in release or something like that. Something that a lot of people were speculating about, because for example on Shiva, that would be a really good thing to be able to do, but basically we can't do it, it's just an extension of the buff. And then last but not least, Nascent Flesh no longer requires a party member in order to execute this skill. So we basically have Blood Bath back. Now, let's talk about Nascent Flesh first real quick, and then I'll go over everything else because that is a much longer discussion. So, Nascent Flesh not requiring a target is good for a couple of different reasons. First of all, it allows you to solo content a whole lot easier. Again, as you can see in the background right here, I am soloing an old Extreme Primal. Back when I first tried to solo Sophia Extreme on Warrior, it didn't really work out because I just felt like I didn't have enough healing, and eventually I turned myself to Dark Knight because Dark Knight with its strong shielding was able to get the job done instead, because I could kind of like cheese around not getting the Thunder vulnerability debuff. Warrior, I just couldn't do it because I didn't have enough healing. Right now with the Nascent Flesh change, I am able to solo this content with ease because I can now heal myself so much more. I pair it up with In Release, I pair it up with Inner Chaos and Upheaval or something like that, and you get a pretty decent amount of healing in solo content. So you should be seeing a whole lot more people trying to take Warrior into solo content as well, which should be a lot of fun. Now, when it comes down to more normal content where you're doing like 8-man or 4-man content, the change isn't super big, but there is still a decent quality of life change here. Not requiring a target is actually really good, because sometimes, well, there's two reasons for that. First of all, most of the time you would macro the ability itself, and macros in Final Fantasy aren't all that amazing. Second of all, your target also needs to be close enough to you. So let's take, for example, you're doing a dungeon, the boss is on one side of the arena, your 3 party members are standing on the other side because it's a healer and, for example, like 2 ranged DPS, so they can stand wherever they want, and they're out of range for you, so you can't actually target them with your Nascent Flesh. You need to like come closer to them to be able to do it, but by the time that you get close, by the time you realize that they're out of range, you might have already used your burst attacks, and then of course using Nascent Flesh on non-burst stuff doesn't really heal you as much because it is a lifesteal effect, so to speak. So that is why I think being able to use Nascent Flesh on just yourself is pretty good in those scenarios. Of course, for example, if you're on a dungeon boss and your whole party is dead, you're the last man standing, now Nascent Flesh is going to be able to actually save you because you're able to use it, and then maybe you can finish the boss off all by yourself because you have all of this healing available to you. So I think that this was a pretty good change, more specifically for the solo stuff, but it's a little bit of quality of life when it comes down to dungeons and such as well. Or for example in a 24-man, if you're tanking the boss and your party is literally nowhere to be found near you, then this could be pretty useful as well to just be able to use it on yourself. Now, let's go over the Storm's Eye changes. First of all, the duration going from 30 seconds to 60 is mostly a quality of life change that I thought was going to be for dungeons specifically, because more often than not you would drop your Storm's Eye buff when you went from one pool to the next, which was kind of annoying because you don't necessarily want to spend 3 single target GCDs in an AoE scenario just to get that Storm's Eye buff up on your hotbar right there. So it is something that I think is a pretty good change when it comes down to dungeons. Now, when it comes down to single target fights like Extreme Primal, Savages and such like that, I didn't really think that this would have a very big change into the rotation of Warrior, but it actually does. And the main reason why this is a pretty good thing is for people that were not that adept at playing Warrior. Now, Warrior is one of the easier jobs to play when it comes down to the tank jobs that are available to it. Paladin is another pretty simple one, but Warrior has always been a really easy job to play. However, when you wanted to optimize Warrior, you really needed to look at it GCD per GCD to try to make it so that you would refresh Storm's Eye as late as possible, because every time that you refresh Storm's Eye with a couple of seconds left on it, you're doing something wrong basically, and you would lose damage because you could basically extend the duration on a later date to lose the least amount of time remaining on it. Now, because of this change, you can basically refresh it whenever you want, as long as it drops below 30 seconds, when it comes down to like not taking in release into account just yet. So basically there's a lot more leniency when it comes down to when do you want to refresh it. It also means that if there are longer downtimes in a fight, you can refresh your Storm's Eye early, get it to like 50 seconds or something like that, and then when the boss comes back 30 seconds later, you'll still have your Storm's Eye buff applied to you, so you won't lose the first 3 GCDs without having the buff up on you. So that's also a pretty good change for that. So I think this is basically to make it so that people that did not know the whole GCD optimization with like managing your beast gauge to make it so that you can get like an extra fell cleave out before you refresh the buff, or do you want to refresh first and then fell cleave because otherwise you would fell cleave outside of the buff or something like that. I think that is a pretty good change when it comes down to the user friendliness of Warrior. When it comes down to me playing it personally, I do not feel like my mastery of the job has now been made a whole lot easier. Yes, it is simpler to play now, but it's not like it feels bad to play. It's not like everything that I have learned to play Warrior well has gone like down the drain and it's not useful to me anymore. Because there is still some really cool optimization stuff that you need to do. There is still like the pooling of resources to the raid buffs like a trick attack or something like that. That is all still there. And it's just that the management of your Storm's Eye buff has now been made a whole lot easier. But you also still need to kind of think about it, because of course you don't want to refresh your Storm's Eye to the maximum duration right before your inner release comes up, because then you're going to be wasting 15 seconds of your Storm's Eye. It's basically made it so that the Storm's Eye management has now become a little bit more interesting in my opinion, because you can be like, do I want to refresh it now and then maybe do some other stuff with my GCDs, or do I want to not refresh it, get an extra fell cleave out, and then refresh it through using in release, because that is something that you can do now as well. So for example, going halfway through a fight, you can be like, the boss comes back, I still have like 10 seconds left of my Storm's Eye. Normally you would do another Storm's Eye combo to refresh the buff and then go into in release, but let's say right now the boss comes back, you have 10 seconds left, in release is ready, I can now refresh my Storm's Eye buff by using in release itself. So there's a lot of cool things and interactions that this actually does with the job that I actually do kind of think is pretty fun about it. Now, one thing that I do not like about these changes though is the change to Mithril Tempest. Now, it's changing to being a 30-second increase instead of 10 seconds, I think is great. When it comes down to dungeon pulls, you just want to have that buff up at all times anyway, so the longer the buff duration, the higher the extension is going to be from using that one combo is going to be better, because of course we don't really care too much about like getting extra beast gauge or something, because that just isn't there. You only use that Mithril Tempest combo anyways, so with extending the duration more is good. Now, the thing that I don't like about it is that Mithril Tempest does not grant you Storm's Eye. That has always been my major complaint. I don't care that we went from 10-second extension to 30-second extension. I would have cared a lot more about Mithril Tempest now granting you Storm's Eye instead, because the main issue that I had was having to do a single target combo in order to get the buff in an AoE scenario, and that is still the case to this date. So the one thing that it is good for is when you come from a boss fight and you have the maximum duration and you then go into pulling mob packs, it's easier to keep the buff going. But the initial application of the buff, that problem is still there. So I hope in the next patch 5.4 or something, or maybe in a later balance patch like 5.35, anything like that, that they would change it to just grant you the Storm's Eye buff as well, rather than just extend it. That's the only real complaint that I have with Warrior at the moment. So when it comes down to these changes, I think they were good. Getting Storm's Eye to 60 seconds makes it so that it's a lot more user friendly to people that do not know the whole GCD optimization around Warrior. For people that did know the whole optimization, it's not necessarily going to be more boring to play or way easier to play, because you're still going to be mainly thinking about where do I want to use my inner chaoses, where do I want that infuriate, do I want to maybe refresh my Storm's Eye duration by using inner release now instead. So there's a lot of cool things that you can still do as well. GCD optimization is still there, it's just that you have a little bit more leniency when it comes down to the Storm's Eye buff itself. Now of course, because inner release extends the duration of Storm's Eye, you will use less Storm's Eye costs, meaning that you have more Storm's Path, meaning that you will get more Beast Gauge, and that is going to be a very slight DPS increase for Warrior, but it is very slight. So it's maybe like going to be a 20 Beast Gauge increase, which would translate to an Onslaught, which is like what, 100 DPS or like 100 potency or something like that. So it's really not that big of an increase in DPS for Warrior, but it's still a small increase nevertheless. It also makes it so with this change that you don't necessarily need to use your Onslaught to dump Beast Gauge, because of the whole Storm's Eye reapplication being so much more lenient now. That it kind of changes that as well, but that is a little bit more in depth when it comes down to Warrior optimization itself. For now, I do think that the changes are nice. I'm definitely going to be playing around with them a whole lot more to see how I really feel about them, but as I said, first impressions so far are pretty positive. The only thing that I would really like for them to change is Mithril Tempest now just granting you Storm's Eye instead of only just extending the duration by 30 seconds. But yeah, that's kind of going to be it for me. Let me know what you think about the Warrior changes. Do you think they were fun changes? Is this going to make you want to play Warrior more? Or do you think they would still need to do something else for you to come back to Warrior or anything like that? Let me know in the comments down below. But yeah, that's going to be it for me. I want to thank you for watching. I want to thank my Patreons for supporting me. And I'll see you in the next one.